and about how we're made righteous by faith in Christ. All these great things that he preached. He's heard all these things, and then to top it off, when he gets back on earth, back in his regular life, Satan sends this messenger of Satan, and he's got shipwrecks and trouble and beatings, and everywhere he goes, they're throwing stones at him and whipping him and throwing him into prison, and everything's, just everywhere he goes, it has the effect of weakening him, or he's getting opposition everywhere. So it says, verse 8, "For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it may depart from me." So he did the thing that I guess we would all logically do. He went to the Lord. He said, "Lord, this messenger of Satan is buffeting me. He's attacking me." Did it say, did I read that right? The messenger of Satan did buffet me. I just thought of something funny. I heard one preacher say, and he was kind of a big man, a little bit, large. He said, "I'm just like Paul. The messenger, he buffets me everywhere I go." No, it's not a buffet. That's not what he means. So he goes to the Lord and he says, "This messenger of Satan is attacking me. He's everywhere I go. I get all these things are going wrong." See, and I can understand how he would, make that a matter of prayer. 3 times it says he prayed, and then it says, verse 9, "He," meaning Jesus, "said to me, listen, my grace is sufficient for thee. My grace is enough for you. For my strength is made perfect in weakness." Or if I can paraphrase it this way, it says, "My strength is made perfect in your weakness." In other words, I don't have to say it other words, let me read it. "Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory or boast about my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Now what Paul said is, I thought to myself, I'm just going to go to Jesus and say, "Jesus, make this messenger of Satan leave me alone." But guess what? He didn't come from Jesus. He doesn't work for Jesus. He's a messenger of Satan. Does everybody understand that? Now did you notice, again, let me just think again about the things we read. What kind of things did we read? Well, we talked about shipwreck, but most of it was like beatings, stonings, false brethren, things of that kind. Most of it was things people did. Did you know, and I hate to say this, Jesus doesn't manipulate people like we're robots, like we're puppets. When people are bad to you, he doesn't necessarily, he can't just make them stop, Does that make sense? He doesn't treat us like robots. See, the way I know that is he doesn't treat me like a robot. He doesn't treat me like a puppet. Generally in life, I kind of make my own decisions. Hopefully, right decisions. We try to walk in the light and walk with the Lord, But did you know, I think you can look at your own life and see he's not jerking you around like a puppet. He doesn't jerk you out of bed in the morning. If your alarm goes off and you don't get out of bed, it's you. He's not going to dress you in the morning. You got to do it, see? What he's saying here is this messenger of Satan, I guess, motivating these people to beat and to whip and to do all these things. He said, "I went to the Lord," and the Lord basically is saying to him, "You know what, Paul? My grace is all you need." When he says, "My grace is sufficient for you," let's stop for a minute and define grace. What does it really mean? What does grace mean? Well, one way we define grace is God's unmerited favor. I like that. I like that definition. We heard another definition when we were reading back there in chapter 9, where he said he's able to make all grace abound towards you. Remember that? Remember how the Amplified defined it? Every favor and earthly blessing. Jesus is saying, my favor, my grace, I am sending blessings your way. I'm sending favor. My favor and my grace resting on your life is really all you need, Paul. Now, the reason I'm saying that today is, see, we don't suffer the things that he suffered. Right? Would we agree? We don't. But the things we suffer are bad enough. But see, the same truth is true for us. His grace is what we need. His grace, his favor in our lives is sufficient for us. And then he says a wild thing. He says, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities. Or in other words, he said, I'm going to look at my problems in a different light because that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Verse 10, he explains it in a little different way. Therefore, he says, I take pleasure in infirmities. Now, I don't think he means that literally. I don't think he literally means, oh boy, I love these infirmities. I think he's just saying, I'm looking at it in a different way. In reproaches, in necessities. Again, you notice the kind of language he's using describing these things. Infirmity, weakness, reproaches, necessities, persecutions, distresses for Christ's sake. And then listen to this line. This is the bottom line. For when I am weak, then I am strong. What does he mean by that? He says, in the areas where I am without power, Jesus said that's when the power of Christ rests upon you. Now, you could say it another way. When you're strong and self-sufficient and can do it yourself, then you don't really need Jesus. But he says, when you feel weak, when you sense that you're powerless, that's when the power of Christ can rest upon you. So he says, I am going to look at these problems in a little different light. Because if it makes me weak, then I'm a good candidate for the power of Christ to rest upon me. You know, it's as though he's saying, I'm just going to lean back on the grace of God and let his power take care of it. Isn't that a good thought? Yeah, I think that is a good thought. Because out there saying, my grace is sufficient for you. Now let me read you one more verse. Passage, and then we'll call that good for today. This is in Philippians, and I'm sure you've heard this before. I'm just going to read it again, just food for thought. Philippians chapter 4. Paul is writing this to the Philippians because they sent him a gift. He was in prison when he wrote this. If you read the whole letter, you can find out. Part of the trouble that Paul suffered, he was accused falsely of the Jews in Jerusalem, and the big riot started, and the Romans took him into custody, and he appeared before these magistrates, and he was accused falsely again. So he appealed to Caesar, and you could do that because Paul was a Roman citizen. So he appealed to any Roman citizen, and it was a great thing to be a Roman citizen. You had a lot of rights, and one of those rights is you could appeal to have your case heard before the emperor himself. So Paul said, I appeal to be heard by Caesar. So he is taken in custody. That's where he suffered one of those shipwrecks he talked about on the way to Rome. He suffered, you can read about it in the book of Acts, a very famous shipwreck. And the storm came up, and everyone despaired of their lives. Paul said, you should have listened to me. He advised him not to set out in the first place. But he said, but be of good cheer, an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve has stood by me this night. And he said, no man's life will be lost, but the ship will be lost. So they all washed up on an island. It was a remarkable situation. But the trouble is, when he got to Rome, the emperor at that time was a madman, really. His name was Nero. And if you read anything about history, Nero was a bad guy, and especially for Christians. Nero was the first Roman emperor to persecute and kill the Christians. And it's not that he necessarily had theological differences with them. It's because there was a great fire and burned up a big part of Rome, and the people started blaming Nero and saying he was negligent in letting the city burn down. And they even started these rumors that he might have started the fire himself so that he could rebuild it and have all these, things to glorify, like the statue to Nero and the Nero, stadium and the Nero Street and all these Nero things. And they started blaming him. So he started a rumor and said the Christians did it. They were a new group, and everybody didn't know what they were about, and they were kind of suspicious. So he began to persecute the Christians. And he didn't just arrest them. There are stories you wouldn't believe about what he did to try to deflect attention against himself. I read one account, and this is kind of horrible, and I'm just telling you this so that you understand the trouble Paul is in now. He would take Christians and put them on stakes and cover them in tar and set them on fire to light his garden parties. It was terrible things. He would cover them in animal skins and throw them in with the lions so they'd be torn up by lions just for people's entertainment. He did terrible things to the Christians. He was not any friend of the Christians. So Paul now is in jail in Rome, ready to appear before this man. Now guess what happened to all the people where Paul preached when he got thrown? Paul writes and he says, all my friends that were with me, they've all abandoned me. Well, I can understand. He's in serious trouble, No telling what's liable to happen. And if you're hanging around with Paul, no telling what's liable to happen to you either. And he writes to the Philippians, he said, everyone has forsaken me except for you. The Philippians sent somebody, a representative of their church, with an offering. We don't know what it was, if it was clothes, if it was food. We don't know. They sent somebody to Paul with something to help him in his captivity. Because when you were in jail, in a Roman jail, you were just basically on your own to fend for yourself. Your friends had to take care of you. So he's in this probably rat-infested, nasty dungeon of a place, and the Philippians have sent him some support. And he is so grateful. He's so thankful to them. He's writing to them, and he's thanking them. And he says some really wonderful things here in this letter. But here's the conclusion, chapter 4. This is the last chapter. Verse 9 says this: those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do. In other words, think about what I told you, what you saw in my life, and you're safe in imitating me. The God of peace shall be with you. But, he says,